Day 1, I walked into my daughter's house with a duffel bag and a heart wide open, ready to help her survive new motherhood. By day 9, after sleepless nights and caring for her screaming baby, she told everyone I was just the maid. Then I heard her say, "Let her feel useful before she dies." That's when I left quietly. But what happened next was actually crazy. So before I take you inside the 9 worst days of my life, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and make sure to subscribe if you've ever been treated like you were less than family in your own child's home. Because what happened after she called me the maid, even I couldn't believe it. My name is Evelyn Harris, I'm 72, and 9 days ago I thought I was just visiting my daughter to help with her newborn. What I didn't realize was that those 9 days would break me in ways I never saw coming. When I pulled into Lily's driveway that afternoon, the June sun glaring off the windshield, I had to sit in the car for a moment, gripping the wheel while my heart settled down. The last few months had already been exhausting. Doctor appointments, downsizing my apartment, trying to ignore how quiet everything had gotten since my husband passed. But I was ready to feel needed again, to be useful, not just old and waiting. Lily opened the door holding baby Emma, only 4 days old, her eyes hollow with sleep deprivation and something else I couldn't place yet, maybe panic or resentment. She gave me this tight, mechanical smile as she stepped aside and said, "I really need you, Mom. I haven't slept in 3 nights." I walked in with my duffel, already hearing the baby's soft cries escalate into those raw, breathless screams only a newborn can make. I told myself this was normal. This was just part of the deal. Help out, hold the baby, maybe cook a little and stay out of the way. What I didn't expect was how quickly I'd be pulled in completely. Within an hour, I was pacing the living room with Emma on my shoulder while Lily showered. By evening, I was running on instinct, boiling bottles, folding tiny onesies, wiping down countertops, trying not to ask too many questions because Lily seemed so tightly wound. Brian, her husband, was polite but distant, vanishing into the basement for Zoom meetings and barely glancing up when I passed him. At dinner, he muttered a thank you without looking me in the eye. That night, I took the baby monitor to the guest room, but it barely mattered. I was up every hour anyway, tiptoeing down the hall to soothe Emma as she writhed in her swaddle, her cries sharp and endless. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was failing, even though I'd raised 3 kids myself. The next morning, Lily made coffee and muttered, "I hope she's better today. I can't take much more." I smiled and said, "She just needs time, sweetheart." Even though my back ached and my knees felt like gravel, that afternoon I found myself scrubbing the kitchen sink while Emma napped. When I looked up, I caught my reflection. Action in the microwave. Hair frizzy, eyes baggy, shirt stained with formula, and I thought, this is what I wanted, right? To be needed. But there was no thank you, no warmth, just more tasks, more exhaustion, more silence from Lily, who barely noticed me unless I wasn't doing something. That night, I sat on the back porch with a mug of tea, listening to the baby's cries echo through the baby monitor on my lap, and I told myself I could handle 8 more days. But something in my gut whispered, "Evelyn, this isn't going to go how you think." By the second day, I had stopped pretending I was just a guest and started functioning like unpaid staff. Up before sunrise, making scrambled eggs that no one touched, wiping down countertops out of habit more than necessity, changing diapers while Lily sat on the couch like a statue, scrolling endlessly on her phone, her eyes bloodshot and distant. Emma still hadn't slept more than 20 minutes at a time, and I watched as the circles under Lily's eyes deepened into something almost bruised. I offered to take the night shift again, brushing it off with a joke about how I never sleep much anyway, though truthfully, my body was screaming for rest. I hadn't felt this kind of bone-deep exhaustion since Lily was a baby herself. That night, around 3:40 a.m., when Emma's screams tore through the baby monitor like fire, I rocked her in the living room, desperate and delirious, trying every trick I could remember from decades ago. She kept wailing, fists clenched, face red, and in that moment of helplessness, I started humming a hymn my own mother used to sing to me, soft, slow, steady, and somehow, miraculously, Emma settled. She didn't fall asleep, but her breathing slowed, her body relaxed against mine, and in that fragile stillness, I felt something I hadn't in years: purpose. But also guilt, because in comforting her, I felt more connection than I had with Lily in weeks. The next morning, Lily came downstairs as I was feeding Emma on the couch, her face slack with fatigue, and when she saw us, she stopped in her tracks. "She's calm with you," she said, almost like a question, almost like it hurt. I didn't respond. I just smiled gently. That day, Lily surprised me by offering toast and even asked if I needed anything. It was the smallest gesture, but it felt monumental. Later, while putting away Emma's clean laundry in their bedroom, I noticed something tucked behind a pile of unused baby items: a half-empty whiskey bottle. My stomach dropped. I didn't touch it or say anything. I just stared at it for a few seconds, then quietly closed the closet door. I didn't need her to admit anything. I could see it in her eyes, hear it in her tone. That bottle wasn't just for stress, it was for escape. That night, as I rocked Emma again, my arms aching, eyelids drooping, I whispered into her tiny ear, "We'll get through this, baby girl." But deep down, I was starting to wonder if Lily would even let us. By day 3, the exhaustion wasn't just physical anymore. It had settled into something heavier. Something that clung to my skin, made every movement feel like it required triple the effort. Getting out of bed just to heat up a bottle felt like dragging myself through wet cement. Even though I kept telling myself Lily needed me and that it was just temporary, I could feel my patience thinning in ways that scared me. I hadn't felt this kind of edge since going through chemotherapy 5 years ago, when everything in my body felt fragile and unpredictable. But I told myself this was different. This was for family and I could handle it. However, I started noticing the cracks. Lily was skipping showers, wearing the same stained pajamas for 2 days straight, snapping at Brian over nothing, and leaving Emma to cry in her bassinet longer each time. I didn't blame her, not really, but something about her silence was starting to feel dangerous. When I gently offered to hold the baby or make her something to eat, she would nod, but her eyes didn't connect with mine. It was like she was fading into the walls. That afternoon, I made a small mistake. I dropped a bottle of freshly prepared formula on the kitchen floor. The plastic cracked, and formula splashed across the tile like spilled paint. Before I could even react, Lily came storming in. Her voice sliced through the air. "Seriously, Mom? That was the last of the prepped milk." Then she stomped past me without waiting for a response. I stood there frozen, holding the broken bottle like I was holding my own indictment. I didn't argue or defend myself. I just knelt down and started cleaning the mess in silence. That night, after Emma finally fell asleep in my arms around midnight, I stepped outside onto the porch with my phone and messaged my oldest friend Sarah in Arizona. All I could bring myself to type was, "It's like I'm invisible here. She treats me like the maid, not her mother." A few minutes later, Sarah replied, "That's not okay. Come visit. You don't have to stay where you're not respected." I stared at that message far longer than I should have, then slid the phone into my pocket and quietly went back inside. What I didn't know was that Lily had been standing in the hallway when I came in, just out of sight, talking to Brian in a voice low and tired. But I heard it clear as day: "Let her feel useful before she dies. It's all she's got left anyway." She wasn't trying to be cruel. She wasn't even trying to hurt me. But those words cracked something inside me that I didn't even know was still whole, harder than chemo, harder than widowhood, harder than anything I'd survived. I stood in the dark kitchen, Emma's tiny body curled against my chest, her soft breathing warming my collarbone, and I said nothing. I just closed my eyes and swallowed the lump in my throat, because now I knew the truth. My daughter didn't see me as a mother. She saw me as a chore, a fading inconvenience with a heartbeat. The next day, I went through the motions like nothing had changed, even though everything inside me had. I didn't say a word about what I crossed town to Sarah's condo, a modest little place with beige siding, soft lighting, and the kind of silence that feels like a blanket after a storm. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled me into a hug so tight, I nearly broke down in her arms right there. I didn't mean to cry, not yet, but the second her hand touched my back, I whispered. She called me the maid, and that was it. My throat closed, my knees weakened, and I let myself fall apart for the first time in days. She didn't try to fix it. She just led me to the guest room, brought me a heating pad for my back, and let me be. That night, I lay on her spare bed, staring at the ceiling fan, the soft hum of it mixing with thoughts that wouldn't stop spinning. I couldn't stop replaying everything: Lily's face, her tone, the shrill cry of Emma as I walked away. I kept reaching for the baby monitor on instinct, only to realize it wasn't with me anymore. There was no Emma, no crying, just silence. And as much as I hated the way I was treated, I hated the silence more. The next day passed slow and quiet. Sarah made tea, we watched old crime shows, and I tried to pretend that the knot in my chest wasn't growing tighter with every hour I didn't hear from Lily. She didn't call, she didn't text, not even a thank you or we're fine. I told myself that was okay. I told myself I needed space, but I kept checking my phone like I was waiting for permission to come back. Then, on the third night, just after I'd made myself a grilled cheese and finally convinced myself to relax, my phone lit up with Brian's name. For a second, I just stared at it. Part of me didn't want to answer. Part of me was still angry, still aching. But my gut told me this wasn't a casual call. When I picked up, his voice cracked before he even finished the first sentence. "Evelyn," he said, "I know you're mad, but we need help." The words hit me like a punch. He explained that Emma hadn't been feeding properly since I left, that Lily was spiraling, shutting down, refusing to listen, refusing to sleep, and that Emma had become lethargic. They'd taken her to the ER. "She's in the pediatric wing now," he said, his voice barely holding it together. "They think it's dehydration from the colic, but they're monitoring for something else too, something with her blood sugar." I didn't let him finish. I grabbed my bag, called out to Sarah, "I have to go," and was out the door before she could ask what was happening. The drive back was a blur of headlights and pounding heartbeats. Every red light felt like a punishment. Every second stuck behind a slow driver felt like a warning for leaving in the first place. When I pulled into the hospital lot, the sky was just darkening. I spotted Lily through the glass doors, slumped in a chair, face buried in her hands. The same girl I once saw fall off a bike and scream, not because she was hurt, but because she didn't know what else to do. She didn't see me walk in. Brian did. His face looked like guilt had been living there for days. He nodded toward the hallway without saying a word, and I followed the nurse into the dim room where Emma lay hooked up to a monitor, her tiny body looking smaller than I remembered. I moved to her side, touched her soft hand, and felt her stir just slightly, just enough to know she knew I was there. For the first time since I left that house, I exhaled, not because everything was okay, but because somehow she was still holding on. Standing beside Emma's hospital crib, watching her chest rise and fall in those shallow, uncertain breaths, I felt like I couldn't breathe myself. The machines were steady. The nurses said she was stable, but stable doesn't mean safe. Anyone who's lived long enough knows that one phone call, one scan, one shift in numbers can flip your whole world inside out. I wanted to scoop her up, hold her against me the way I had in that living room just nights ago, but she looked so fragile under the wires and monitors, so impossibly small, like even love might bruise her if I wasn't careful. I stood there quietly, one hand on her blanket, just being near her, just willing her to stay okay. Lily came into the room a little later, her face streaked with dried tears and makeup, her shoulders rounded, like she was carrying her entire life on them. She didn't speak at first. She didn't even look at me. She walked over to the chair in the corner, curled up like a teenager, and stared at the floor. I wanted to be angry. I'd earned that much, but all I could see was a young mother drowning and pretending she wasn't. I walked over slowly, sat in the chair beside her, and when I spoke, I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "Nobody handles this alone," and something in her cracked. She leaned into me like she hadn't done since she was a child, buried her face in my sweater, and sobbed full-body shaking sobs that had been waiting days to get out. I held her because that's what mothers do, even when we're hurting too. When the nurse came in again, clipboard in hand and that calm, practiced voice I've always admired, she told us Emma was responding to fluids and the blood sugar issue looked like a temporary crash from the colic, not permanent, not dangerous, but enough to require close watch. We nodded, barely processing, and when the nurse left, Lily whispered, "I thought I could do it all. I thought I had to." I didn't say, "You didn't," I didn't say, "You should have called." I just reached for her hand and squeezed it, and when she squeezed back, I felt the smallest shift between us, like maybe she finally understood what I'd been trying to give all along. That night, I stayed with Emma while Lily went to lie down in the parent rest suite. I sat in the corner chair, feet up, arms crossed, but I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I just watched Emma breathe, humming softly now and then that same hymn I'd sung to her in the dead of night, the only thing that ever seemed to calm her. Around midnight, Brian showed up again, freshly showered, clearly trying. He handed me a cup of tea and said I should H. "I have said this days ago, thank you." And this time there was no guilt in his voice, just a man realizing what it means to really rely on someone. I nodded, took the tea, and watched him kiss Emma's forehead like it might fix everything. For the first time since all this started, I didn't feel like a guest. I didn't feel like help. I felt like her mother again, like someone who mattered. The next morning, after another restless night by Emma's bedside, the soft rhythm of her monitor became background noise, almost like a lullaby. Lily sat across from me, pale and puffy-eyed but calmer than she'd been in days. We didn't speak much at first, just passed the time in silence, watching Emma sleep. Then, out of nowhere, Lily broke the silence with a voice so small I almost missed it. "I never wanted to be a mum this soon," she said, her eyes fixed on the edge of the crib. I just didn't know how to say it. My heart didn't break, it paused. Because as much as I thought I understood what she was going through, I hadn't heard this truth yet, not this raw. I didn't flinch. I didn't judge. I just listened. I told her I understood, and not because I wanted to make her feel better, but because it was true. I told her about a moment she never knew, years before she was born, when I sat on the edge of my own bathtub staring at a positive test, heart racing, knowing I wasn't ready and wondering if that meant I was a bad person. I told her about the child I chose not to have because I was overwhelmed and alone, and how I still wonder who that child might have been. Her eyes welled with tears, but not from shame, from something deeper, recognition. Not every woman is ready the moment the baby comes. Some of us fake it until it feels like love, and some of us carry guilt we never talk about. She reached over and took my hand, her fingers cold but steady, and for the first time in years, I felt like she wasn't just hearing me, she was seeing me. Emma stirred in her sleep, a soft little squeak that made both of us glance over at the same time. Instinctively, I got up and picked her up with the kind of ease that can't be taught, only earned over years of 3 a.m. crying and endless rocking. Lily watched me with tired eyes, but they didn't hold resentment this time, just relief, maybe even respect. Later that afternoon, while Brian was out grabbing lunch, Lily turned to me and said, "Would you mind staying a little longer after we're home, just until I find my footing?" And I didn't even hesitate. I nodded before she could finish the question because for the first time, she wasn't asking me to save her. She was asking me to stand beside her. We weren't fixed, not entirely. There were still bruises between us, still things unsaid, but the walls were down now, and the air between us had shifted. We weren't fighting over control anymore. We were quietly learning how to share the weight. And as the light poured through the window and hit Emma's cheek just right, I knew this was it. It was a fragile, imperfect beginning. It was enough. We came home from the hospital 3 days later, and though the walls were the same and the furniture hadn't moved, the energy in the house had changed. It wasn't perfect, not by any stretch, but there was a quiet truce in the air, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken to be understood. Lily was gentler in her movements, more deliberate with her words. Brian made himself present in a way I hadn't seen since Emma was born. He started changing diapers without being asked, took turns with the baby monitor, and even made dinner once, though the rice was still crunchy and the chicken a little dry. No one complained. I smiled and thanked him, and when Lily caught my eye across the table, she smiled too. It was small, but it was real. Emma seemed calmer too, sleeping for longer stretches and crying less frantically. I liked to think she could feel the shift in the house, the difference in our breathing. My role had shifted as well. I wasn't just an extra set of hands anymore. I felt like part of the system, like my presence mattered not just to the baby, but to the rhythm of the home. There was still tension sometimes. Lily would get flustered or Brian would retreat into his phone, but the silence between them wasn't as sharp. We were slowly, awkwardly learning how to live together without stepping on each other's wounds. Then, on the fourth morning, while Lily was upstairs showering and I was in the living room bouncing Emma to the soft hum of a Motown playlist, the front door opened without warning. Brian's mother, Carla, stepped inside with a purse that looked more expensive than anything in the house and a perfume strong enough to knock out a toddler. She looked at me holding Emma and gave a smile so forced it barely moved her face. "Well," she said, setting down a bag of groceries I hadn't asked for, "aren't you just the queen of the nursery?" I didn't answer. I just kept rocking Emma and waited for her to make herself comfortable. 10 minutes later, while Lily fed Emma upstairs, Carla sat across from me at the kitchen table, her arms folded and voice low. "Don't you think it's time to let the parents parent?" she asked, not as a question, but as a judgment. "I know you mean well, but too much help can cause dependency." I didn't bite. I just stared down at my tea, holding it steady in both hands. I'd heard this kind of language before from in-laws, from neighbors, from anyone who didn't understand what it takes to hold a house together when it's falling apart. That night, while folding laundry in the guest room, Lily found me unusually quiet and asked what was wrong. I told her what Carla had said, expecting her to smooth it over or explain it away, but she didn't. She just frowned and whispered, "She's always hated that I listen to you more than her." And in that small moment, I felt something stronger than validation. I felt chosen. Still, Carla's words lingered in my chest like a splinter. I didn't want to be seen as someone who overstayed, someone who didn't know when to. I wanted to be part of the family, not a shadow in someone else's home. For the first time since returning, I felt that familiar ache starting to stir again, the one that said, "Maybe you don't belong here after all." The next morning, the house felt different, not chaotic like before, but tight, like the air had thickened with something unsaid. Lily moved around the kitchen faster than usual, setting down bottles a little too hard, sighing under her breath, and not quite looking at me. I didn't need to ask. I knew she was replaying Carla's visit in her head, maybe feeling torn between keeping the peace and protecting her space. I didn't want to push, so I took Emma out for a walk around the block in her stroller, pointing out flowers she was too young to care about, just to give the house room to breathe. But when I returned, I felt it before I even crossed the threshold, tension thick in the hallway. Lily's voice was clipped as she ended a phone call with Brian. She turned and gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "She fell asleep halfway through the walk," she said. I nodded, expecting some kind of thanks. "Instead," she said, "I think you should stop taking her out without asking. It's a boundary thing." Her tone wasn't cruel, but it was sharp enough to cut. I nodded again, this time slower, and headed upstairs to put away some of Emma's clean clothes. No fight, no protest, just quiet compliance. But later that afternoon, as I sat in the nursery folding tiny socks and onesies, Lily walked in with her arms crossed and jaw clenched. Before I could say anything, she said, "You don't get to replace Grandma just because mine died before I was born." The words hit me like a slap, not because they were loud, but because they came from somewhere deep and unresolved. I stood slowly, holding a little sock in my hand like it might help steady me, and said, "Is that what you think I'm doing?" Her voice cracked. "You're in every corner of this house, Mom. I can't breathe without feeling like you're waiting for me to mess up so you can fix it." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked her in the eyes and said, "I came when you asked. I stayed when you shut me out. I left when you pushed me, and I came back when your daughter needed me. Don't confuse presence with replacement." She didn't respond, just looked down at the floor and said nothing. I knew then that no matter how far we'd come, there were still pieces of her heart that hadn't caught up, that still blamed me for being the stronger one when she was scared. I packed my things that evening, not in anger, not in silence, but in peace. I folded everything carefully, zipped my bag, and walked into Emma's room one last time. I kissed her on the forehead while she slept, left a fresh bottle warming on the counter, and walked to the door without saying goodbye. Outside, the evening air was cool. The train station was only 20 minutes away. I drove slowly, hands calm on the wheel, but with a quiet ache pressing at my ribs like grief. I found a parking spot by the platform and just sat there, watching the lights blink through my windshield, not sure if I was leaving forever or just giving them space to miss me. Then my phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe. Lily's voice came through the speaker, thick with tears. "We can't do this without you, Mom. Please don't leave us again." In that moment, I didn't feel like a maid or a mistake. I felt chosen. Finally, I turned the car around before I even responded, phone still in my hand, Lily's voice still echoing in my ears. The streets I'd just left rolled back under my tires like a film rewinding itself. I didn't overthink it. I didn't rehearse what I'd say. I just knew I had to go back, not out of guilt or duty, but because this time they asked. Because this time it wasn't about saving them, it was about being part of them. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was on, and Lily was already standing there, barefoot in her sweatshirt, eyes swollen but open. She didn't speak. She just wrapped her arms around me before I'd even put the car in park. It wasn't a dramatic apology or a monologue. It was just a real, silent hug, the kind that says, "I'd get it now." I held her back longer than I meant to. Inside, Emma was sleeping upstairs and Brian was on the couch, holding the monitor like a man finally starting to understand what a family requires. Over the next few days, life didn't magically fix itself. There were still awkward pauses, tired moods, and the occasional slammed cabinet, but there was also rhythm. There was effort. Lily started making small lists to keep herself sane. Brian picked up groceries without being told. I still folded clothes and rocked Emma, but it no longer felt like servitude. It felt like trust. One morning, I walked into the kitchen to find Lily at the table with a notebook in front of her. She looked up, then pushed a folded note toward me without a word. It wasn't long, just a few uneven lines scribbled in a rush. "You're not the maid. You're not backup. You're our foundation. Thank you for loving us when we didn't deserve it." I didn't cry, not then. I just tucked it into my pocket and smiled. It was enough. On the 9th day, the same day I was originally supposed to leave, I made pancakes early in the morning. Lily joined me with 2 mugs of coffee and said, "You've done enough, Mom. It's okay to rest now." And this time when she said it, it didn't sound like dismissal. It sounded like recognition, like peace. I packed slowly that afternoon, not because I was stalling, but because I wanted the goodbye to be gentle. I kissed Emma on the forehead while she napped, left a stack of folded onesies on the changing table, and slung my bag over my shoulder. As I stepped onto the porch, Lily followed me out, and as I turned to say goodbye, she asked, "Will you come back next weekend?" I didn't even hesitate. I smiled and said, "Of course." As I walked down the front path, I heard a giggle from inside, light and sudden. I looked through the window and saw Emma's little hand waving in the air, like she knew, like she remembered. In that moment, something inside me settled. I wasn't just visiting anymore. I wasn't just helping. I was home.